I'm Lance Eaton. I'm here to talk about what I've been doing around generative AI, coupled with a framework to be thinking about exploring and engaging with these tools, and in particular, how you might consider including your students in this conversation. So today's talk is this extension of work that I've been doing for about 15 years in education and technology. I've had this privilege to and desire to really explore this space, in many ways, learning about the possibilities and, of course, the challenges and problems that technology represent in teaching and learning. So in the past decade or so, I've been working around things like hybrid flexible course design, even before the pandemic, so in the mid 2010s. And I've also done things like exploring how digital technologies can change how we think about things like service learning. I've explored the power and importance of student agency, in how things like open educational resources and practices, open pedagogy can improve student learning and meaning making, and then also have been doing a lot of thinking around surveillance and data practices can be another form of power hoarding over students and the impacts that could have. So I'm often trying to look at and figure out this balance of technology as a means of improving opportunity and agency for students, while also recognizing that these tools themselves aren't neutral and come with trade-offs that can be potentially problematic. So all of that is to say that when generative AI showed up in last November, I had a lot of thoughts. But first, I actually want to, do a little bit of acknowledging here that if you've been listening to what's going on in the world in the last year around generative AI, like it can feel like a lot. It can feel like there's just so much going on. And that's why I really love this quote from a colleague of mine, Laura Duman, who has also been doing a lot of work in generative AI and education. And she's one among many folks that are doing this work that I would love to point you to. These are folks like Brian Alexander and Maha Bali, Amanda Bickerstaff, Autumn Keynes, and the list goes on. And don't worry, there's resource that I'll be sharing that has that list and where to find the work that they're doing. But the core of this message in front of us is that there's just a lot out there, and it's okay if you're feeling behind or lost or just trying to figure things out, because there's a lot of people doing public work and making sure that everybody can kind of catch the proverbial next train. And it's okay if you're on different trains that you're exploring different areas. But I just like to start off with this because I know from working with, at this point, hundreds, thousands of faculty around generative AI, this can be overwhelming. This can be really intense. And I just want to give space to folks to know that, like, it's okay if you feel behind. We kind of all feel behind, even those that are doing this work. And it's really just about figuring out how you get into that next spot. So before getting into the agenda, I just want to highlight the link at the bottom of the screen here. This is to what I call the annotated slide deck. So this will give you access to not just the slides, but everything I'm going to say today. It's going to give you access to a bunch of resources, different prompts to try with generative AI that we'll actually take a look at. And it's really there just so folks can kind of get more out of this, and that when I'm done and I leave, you still have something to engage with and think about and keep moving forward. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about how College Unbound, the institution that I work at in Providence, Rhode Island, engaged with and kind of stepped into the space of thinking about how do we figure this out with students. We're going to talk about what's some of the value of using generative AI, even as instructors. Like, what are things we can do with it that actually will be helpful and can be useful and interesting. And then we'll just talk about like what to try next, like where to go from here, how to start to take those steps to get on that train, as it were. So feel free to take a look at those materials. I will be sharing additional materials as we go along. And I hope folks can understand this is like really a start of a conversation, and that it's really incumbent upon everybody here to be looking to and learning from one another about what you're doing and where we're going with this. All right. So, ChatGPT, it came out last November, and it landed kind of mostly with a thud. A lot of folks in higher education they were wrapping up their semester. They were wrapping up the first what felt like normal semester since the pandemic started in spring 2020, and so it could be understood why folks just didn't want to pay attention to this new technology because there was just too much else going on. But some of us in higher education did hear about it and did start to realize the implications of ChatGPT. Again, folks like Maha Bali, Anna Mills, Brian Alexander, and other folks were beginning to have these public conversations, on Twitter, on their blogs, other spaces, to really start to play around with it and figure it out. At the same time, this is what I started to do because I was like, hey, I'm hearing a lot about this, and what does it mean for teaching and learning? What are these tools? What can they do? What should we be concerned about? And my colleague, Autumn Keynes, colleague and friend, came to me with an interesting question. She teaches at College Unbound, and she found what she thought might be a student that was using it and wanted to have a conversation. We wanted, in that conversation, we talked about what did this mean and how did we want to think through it. One of the things about our institution is we center the student experience in really profound ways. And so the last thing we wanted to do was falsely accuse a student of using a tool they might not have used. And so we really had to try to figure that out. So I'm really indebted for her for both her insight and deliberation as we move from the space of concern to the space of curiosity. We moved from angst about, oh no, to deliberation and excitement, honestly. We had a certain amount of respect for a student who if we think about ChatGPT, it was released on November 30th. And by December 15th, a student had figured out a way to use it, possibly. We still don't know for sure, but figured out a way to use it. And there was a little bit of excitement about that. There was wow, there was some creativity there. There was some problem solving they were playing around with. So we're a school that centers student voices and work and really work to address the educational trauma that a reasonable share of our students experience at the hands of traditional higher education. So any framework that we were going to accuse students didn't feel right. A false positive, falsely accusing would just be antithetical to what we were doing. So we went in with curiosity. Autumn posted a note to her class saying, hey, I think some students might have actually used this. I would love to have a conversation with you. She did that and didn't hear back. And we kind of anticipated that as something, that might happen. So what we did was we actually put together a survey, a short anonymous survey, and we actually sent it out to all the students. And that was it. It asked if they knew about ChatGPT, if they were using it, and if so, what ways. And we got back some results that really showed, the students were using it to improve their understanding. They were using it to navigate being multi-language learners in an institution that primarily focuses on learning outputs that are English. And they were using it for brainstorming. And so these are really great insights. And that led me to realize we need to know more and we need to think more deeply about it and not just do so in the absence of students. A lot of my evolving work over the last 6 to 7 years has really been thinking about students and how to make the learning space more equitable, allow for students to have more agency. And so this was a really powerful moment to think about that. And so I had an idea. I realized that what if we did a course that was on general artificial intelligence in education? Generative artificial intelligence in education, where actually the students learn about generative AI while also getting to play with it and thinking about it in an educational context. And through that, first of all, that would make a great learning experience as everything was happening. And then through that, actually with the students, craft the guidelines or for institutional policy for how students and faculty use it. So I had that insight and it absolutely made sense. And so I went to my provost and I was just like, let's do this. And my provost was great. He was on board. He understood what was at the center of this. Um, and we realized that this as a structure could be great for generative AI, but just as a mechanism for thinking about teaching it or thinking about how institutions figure out change, whether it's new technologies, new policies. It really other aspects of the school, really thinking about how we do this with students at the center. My wife, who's also brilliant, had this other idea that she talked through with me of like, what if we could run the course actually twice? And so the first time we run the course, we develop the policies. The second time we run the course, we actually have students test drive those policies. So in our spring semester, we have two 8-week courses. And so spring 1, I ran the course and we developed the policies. And then spring 2, we test pilot them. And so the goal was really to not just to create them, but to try to make sure that like we test drove them, or that the students test drove them and they made sense. For folks that are interested, I also have the syllabus there to share. All of that was great. Like it made all the sense in the world. But before class could start, like faculty still needed guidelines. Faculty still needed to understand what was going on. And so I actually put together and shared out like what our bigger picture strategy was. And that included a temporary policy. Right. So if we were going to work with students to develop the policy, we needed time to do that. But then faculty still needed like some guidance. And so we put something out and we told them like, here's the temporary policy, but there's more coming and it's going to be coming from the students. So at the same time, because like I've been doing this for a while, and I'm deeply invested in open educational practices, I actually began crowdsourcing syllabi policies that were focused on generative AI. So basically this is January, right? Generative AI had only been out for about less than 2 months, and it was quickly approaching 100 million users. And so I realized that faculty also needed some like guidance, and also faculty wanted to share and learn what other people are doing. So another piece in this that was really important was I created this crowdsourced document that was of generative AI policies in syllabi. And currently there's over 100 entries. I mean, back at the beginning, like we started with like 5, quickly got to 10 to 20, but now you can go in there and there is over 100 different policies from different disciplines and different institutions, really providing that insight. So I was doing that, and then of course I was doing these 2 courses, and I can't stress enough how amazing these 2 courses were. Having students join a class where their work will mean something, where they will further actually employ their agency, they will actually they feel like their learning has impact, like it is so beautiful to see. It led to all sorts of discoveries, conversations, and ways of understanding the tool that I just would never have thought of before. And I wouldn't have figured out or learned by just talking to other faculty. That it really had to be the students. And they were great. They had lots of initial and complicated feelings and thoughts about generative AI. So like nobody was like came in, it was just like, this is great or this is horrible. That didn't at some point change up their opinions regularly and really try to figure this thing out. They challenged one another. They challenged my own thinking as we continue to play around with ChatGPT, read about it from different perspectives, and consider what this tool would mean for learning and evaluation. And so the power of this group was evident early on. It was very within the first month, I knew there were really interesting things going on. And so I actually convinced a regional organization that's focused on educational technology in the United States, in the Northeast region, convince them that like we have something here and we need these students to be in front of educational leaders. And so we actually did this workshop where they were a panel sharing and answering questions from leaders in educational technology, people like CIOs and VPs and deans. So these students who've been playing around with this tool, like were in a room with these leaders and like they crushed it. They were really thoughtful and intentional. And in doing that panel, like after they finished, the attendees, all these leaders in education, like their responses were very much like, wow, like we really do need students in this process. Like we need students at the table. We need students to be involved in this because our assumptions about who students are often tainted by worst case scenarios. You know, many of us are thinking about the cheater. Many of us are thinking about, you know, the person that we experience feels very challenging to the work that we do. But we're missing all the students that are amazing and have thoughtful and powerful things to add to this conversation. So since then, my students have been keynotes at conferences. They have been on podcasts. They've been interviewed by places like Chronicle of Higher Ed. And like we are now collectively working to write something. Session 1 of AI in Education, like that course came up with the guidelines. Session 2, we actually got to test drive them. So students tried those on particular assignments in their courses and really see where it worked and whatnot. And then through that, we came up with a proposed policy. That policy got reviewed by faculty and we got rich feedback from faculty. None of the faculty found what the students were asking was unreasonable or unexpected or disjointed. They found there were ways they wanted clarity or they wanted parity, making sure that like if we're asking this of faculty, we ask this of students, but like they got in there and gave some feedback and it went really well. Now, it's at the point where students had a final look at it and it's being, we're at the point of it being passed as our usage policy for our institution. And so it's, it's this really powerful thing. The students and I continue to meet to write and like think about where else this work needs to be. And so the thing I can't stress enough about is just how powerful and important it's been for me to be in this space and to see the students. They bring many different lenses, they bring many different ideas to the space, and they just really were thoughtful about how it all fits together. So that's kind of the project that I did. But I also want to switch over to like, what do these tools mean for how we act as educators, or what are the things that we figure out here? And if you're wondering, this is one of my cats, because my cats always make it into my presentations because I'm a professional. But what I want to actually move into for this piece is to just identify what are some of the ways that we can actually use something like generative AI right now in our work. So I think there's a full range of potential we can lean on, we can play with, and I'm just going to provide folks with a few prompts as examples of what you can do and how that actually might help you in your teaching and learning. So we have 4 different ways you can potentially use it right now: task minimizing, brainstorming partner, first drafting, and sorting through information. So here's an example of task minimizing. I'm about to collectively save all of you a lot of time in just this single prompt. So I use this prompt at the beginning of every semester, and I'm sure many of us, just before the semester starts, we do that thing where we have our syllabus up and we have a calendar up and we toggle back and forth, right? We like, oh, what are all the Tuesdays that I'm teaching this semester? And just try to like have that all there. But we have to do it back and forth. Well, a prompt like this is really cool because what may take 5 to 10 minutes now takes 30 seconds. So this is an example of a prompt I used where I asked GPT to give me all of the Tuesdays between the start and the end of the semester. And now I can just take that and plug that into my syllabus. I actually also asked it to list holidays and stuff. And so, I'm not providing the full listing here. You can see that in the slide deck resources, but like it just popped it all out in the format I wanted. It let me know all of the holidays that I was looking for, and all of this in 30 seconds or less. And I can use that prompt every semester now. Another good example is, this brainstorming. Now, we're all like, as educators, like we're all thinkers and we're good at figuring things out, but we often need other people to, we need to be in dialogue to figure things out or improve upon. And sometimes we don't have that person around. So in this case, this is an instance where I asked ChatGPT to give me some examples of the ways folks might be able to use generative AI. So I was using it as a collaborative partner to help think about something like this presentation, where it's just like, oh, what other ways folks might use it? And then I also asked ChatGPT to frame the output in the form of a table with some added factors. And this is where I really like some of where it goes. So in this case, I asked them to like identify the use case, tell me about the difficulty level, with 5 being the hardest. So I just did a 1 to 5 scale. So it gave me a difficulty level, and then some guidance on how to implement and some sample prompts. And of course, what I love and what I think is really helpful for us in generative AI is we can keep asking questions. So I could decide, oh, I want to learn more about research assistants. And I can keep asking it questions to really flesh out this like high level explanation that I gave. The other thing I love about this tool, and this is where folks get a little challenge, at least with their students, is like, it can be really great at just starting first drafts, or at least creating something that then tells me what I don't want. And that's a really helpful process. But it's not just like typical like writing assignments. You can do this with strategies, you can do reports and plans, lots of different things where you can just get the ball rolling more quickly. So in this case, I asked it to pretend it was an expert in communications and student support. And then I followed it with asking to create a communications calendar to students about different timely information and supports throughout the semester. So once again, I asked it to put it into a table, and it gave me, again, there's a lot more to this, but this is just a snippet of what it returned. But like, the date, the platform, the outline of communication, which office would be responsible, and what the next steps would be after we did this. And so it was, again, just a really simple way, and I can now dig into any of this and learn more. And then finally, I really appreciate the way it can look through qualitative data and use it to make sense of things quickly. I'll still dive into the data. Like often I'm not using this to replace the work, but like to get something moving. So I'll replace it. Like I will dive into the data, but this can also give me like a quick glimpse if I really need a quick glimpse. So in this case, I used Claude AI to review a bunch of anonymous feedback from students about their faculty's use of the learning management system, to try to figure out like what's going well and what isn't with our learning management system. And something to note about this, like we get hundreds of these surveys, these qualitative surveys, like every 4 weeks in our semester. So there is no bandwidth with which to like really get into it or to be able to read it at a granular level. So this is one of those ways that can be really helpful. So I put it in, asked it to give me some feedback, and it identified like, here's the things that are going well overall, and then here are areas of improvement. And again, I can dig into the data more. I can ask it to pull out some specific examples, but really is helpful here in providing just some sense of like, what's the hot take, what's the quick take, and then I can go and start to pull out examples that can help reinforce that. These are some of the use cases that are out there. These are some of the things that people are doing that I think is really powerful and really helpful for our work as educators. So I really frame these as just like, if you haven't started using it yet, these are some really low lift things you can do to start to see how it can help you. So that's really how it can help you. But then the question becomes like, what next, right? So when it comes to generative AI and everything that's been going on, I'm pretty sure we can all relate to this cat here, who is my other cat, by the way. Can all feel like a little overwhelmed, right? And that's why I love this photo of her. So what is it? So then what do we do next, right? What does it mean? We've been going through all of this in the last year, and in some ways it feels like the robots have already taken control. But it's not true. And so what I want to share is like some additional, what's the longer game? What is some of the guidance that you can use to move forward? I think first and foremost is to be playing with it. And its variations. Like, don't wait but go now and kick the tires. Like, you're not going to break generative AI, and it's okay to not know things about it and to be figuring it out as you go along. And there's also a lot of support materials. In fact, the annotated slide deck that I've created has a lot of prompts, has a lot of materials where you can go and learn more. And I think it's really important to go out and try different tools and really see what's right for you, see what's helpful for you, see what might actually make sense in relation to your course. Another piece about this is always think about what you're putting into it. And if you have the right to do so or are violating someone's privacy. And this is particularly students. The thing I see time and again that scares me for so many reasons, because there's all sorts of ethical concerns, is faculty taking students' work and copying it into generative AI or a generative AI plagiarism detector and saying, was this written by you? There's lots of problems with that on all sorts of levels, and also the result is not actually what we think it is. So just be mindful about the information that you put in, whether you have the right to do that, and whether it actually is like you're jeopardizing somebody's privacy. All right. The next is just find your outlets to learn about it. And you're part of an institution of higher education. You're part of an entity that, whether we like it or not, are required to be lifelong learners if we want to continue to adapt to this ever-changing world, changing and complex world. So really put this in your personal agenda for learning and development. You can't just say, I don't need to. I think that this is something that's moving fast enough and showing up in enough places that it's not that your job is going to be replaced by generative AI. It's your job, like your work will be replaced by somebody who is leveraging generative AI. And I think that's the thing, a lot of what we're seeing here. So really, as you're doing that, hone in on the tools that are being used in your field. Start to learn what the conversation is and how folks are considering it. Really try to find your people, as we say, people that are in your field and disciplines. What are they talking about? There's rich discussions going on. I promise you, in every discipline, there are people out there. That are really engaging with this, that are really finding it valuable. So really keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out for the guardrails in your discipline. And then also think about how your usage aligns with your institution, how it aligns with the community and the practices. Just be very mindful that certain industries are going to relate to this or think about this differently, and to be tapped into that conversation. And then the last is just creating your own communities of practice. You're here among colleagues, you're at this conference, you have other people you're in communication with that are doing this kind of work. Start to work with them, start to learn, start to share, start to really make sure you're not just feeling like you have to do it yourself, but that you're actually doing it in collaboration with others. Because as you learn more about these tools and find new ways of using generative AI, sharing what you're finding is just as important as you learning, because we're all trying to figure this out together. And that's really a key piece of being part of a community of learners, being part of a college, is the sharing of learning and all that comes with it. So with that, I will say thank you. And I think we might not have time for questions, but I encourage folks to reach out. I'm always happy to have these conversations.